If you have your Bibles, I'd like you to turn to the book of Romans chapter 26. We're going to begin reading there in a moment. Book of Romans chapter 26. Now, most of you know what this is. If I was to ask you, what am I holding in my hand? Because you know the drill. You know that if you say, oh, Pastor, that looks like a glass half empty, that would mean that you're a negative, pessimistic, dismal, awfulizing kind of an individual. You don't see the bright side. On the other hand, most of you, I think, hopefully all of you, know the drill, and you know that you're supposed to say, this is a glass half full. It's a glass half full. That means you're an optimist. You look at the bright side. You don't look at empty. You look at making its way toward being full. So the reason I want to use that imagery tonight is I want us to evaluate this year from January 1st, 2023, all the way up until the end of this year. Has the past year been a glass half empty kind of a year? Or would you identify this past year as being a glass half full kind of year according to your estimation? And I think it's going to be a very healthy exercise tonight to look back at the past year, to think about it, meditate on it, ponder its various ups and downs, all the various drama and situations and circumstances that took place over the last year. So some of you might say tonight, well, Pastor, I had a good year. Well, what do you mean by that? Is what I want to know. You might be referring, man, I made a lot of money last year. I hit the big time. I made great money. I got married last year or this year, or I became engaged, or I got a new job, or I graduated, or I bought a house, or I bought a new car. And so you're going to say, I had a really good year. But what do you mean by that? What does a good year for a Christian mean? Because you can gain the whole world and lose your soul. And then some of you might say, no, this year was not so good. I had a very bad year. What do you mean by that? Well, I lost my job. I'm struggling financially. We're diving into more and more debt. I missed my sales goals. I lost my house. I'm still not engaged or married. My car broke down. Some of you and someone might look at this year and say, I experienced tragedy or failure this last year, and so therefore it wasn't a good year at all. So was it a glass half full year or a glass half empty year? And of course, that phrase is an idiom. Somebody made a speech in about 1938, it's not nobody you would know, where they invoked this imagery, and it really landed and became a very powerful idiom that we use today. How do you view this glass that has water in it, but it's not full? Is it half empty or is it half full? And that says and can say a lot about how you view life. For example, a glass half empty kind of a person might say the project is only halfway done and we've got a lot of hard work ahead of us. That's a Debbie Downer kind of a guy. A glass half full person might say, we have made significant progress on the project and we're halfway to achieving our goal. Which would you rather hear? Who would you rather hear from? A glass half empty kind of a person might say, I didn't get the promotion at work that I prayed so hard for, and it's discouraging. and I'm discouraged. A glass half full kind of a person would say, although I didn't get the promotion this time, I now have valuable feedback to improve and increase my chances with my next opportunity. So are you a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of person? My point is, and we'll get to the text right now, no matter what happened in your life last year, being a believer in Jesus Christ should make you a glass half full kind of a person. And the text that we're going to read bears this out, a very simple premise that you're very familiar with. Because that is the advantage that we have as believers. You can look back at hardship and difficulty and tragedy and trauma and promotion and money and raises and buying a new house and getting engaged and married. You can look at the whole bundle of life experiences and it is a glass half full. Because there's a God in heaven who's always at work in every situation and circumstance. So let's read our text. Romans 8. Beginning in verse 26. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weaknesses, for we do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Now he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. And we know this is the central premise of our message tonight. And we know that all things work together for good. All things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. So let's bow our heads and ask God's help tonight. Father, thank you so much for such great grace, such great favor, such a great year this year, that in the midst of all of its troubles and twists and turns and drama and setbacks and all the great things that you did to advance your will in our lives, we know that you're at work to perfect us all in Christ Jesus. So let's take a moment to evaluate what the Apostle Paul calls all things. And I think it's a good idea every once in a while to take stock or to take inventory. The end of the year is when businesses do that. They take stock, they take inventory, they have meetings, and they make evaluations. And the objective is to look back. Because now, with hindsight, we can see where we were a year ago, what's happened since then, the kind of decisions that we made, how we interacted with people, and what happened to us during the course of the year. Now, I'm not suggesting we do this perpetually. That wouldn't be good. But it's a good idea to look back and see if there are any lingering lessons that we need to identify from this past year. Should I have done anything differently? Could I have avoided some of my mistakes? My interactions with people, could I have thought more of others and less of myself? Could I have been, or should I have been, more of a servant? Could I have been wiser in the handling of money? How much money did I waste? Did I misspend? Did I handle unwisely? Could I have given more? Saved more? Invested more wisely? Did I take advantage of every opportunity that God presented to me, that came my way? Did I even see the opportunities as opportunities? Because sometimes we miss it. And then there's another component to this. What about all the things that happened to you this past year that were out of your control? Sudden trauma happened. You wouldn't have written it into the script of your life. You would never have imagined that it was going to happen, but it did happen. Sudden trauma. Some of you may have lost loved ones this past year. Did we handle our grief appropriately? Did we maintain our Christian testimony? And were we able to help those around us? Did we think of others during those times of trauma and crisis in our lives? What about people who may have violated you? In other words, you didn't do this, they did it to you. They violated you somehow. They betrayed you, they offended you in some way. How did you handle the offenses of this past year? Should they have been handled better, more wisely, more biblically and scripturally, more like a Christian? Are you going to exit 2023 angry with anybody? How did all things, that's what Paul refers to, that all things work together. How did all things affect you? How did I handle all things? How did I relate to all things? And what lessons can I learn from all things from this past year? So let's examine this for a moment, because I want to put it all into what I will call a bundle tonight. Each and every circumstance, a bundle that includes everything. All of our experiences, all of our interactions, all of our opportunities, all of our mistakes, all of our misjudgments, all the words that we spoke, everything that happened to us, everything that we did and everything that was done to us. Let's put it all in a big bundle together. The good, the bad, the things that we would identify as an incredible blessing, an advantage, and the things that we would identify or that we wish didn't happen and hadn't happened, that we might even call bad or against our interests. Do you remember the word awfulize that I used in a sermon a few years ago? Some people that are the glass half empty type of person have a disposition that is called awfulizing. It's an actual word, and it means to imagine a situation to be as bad as it can be, with no redeeming value, only bad or the worst. Even if something good is coming at you, awfulizers will second guess and be suspicious and not take things at face value and put a bad spin on it. And I'll give you an example in a moment. The other word that is more extreme than that is the word catastrophizing. That word is when a person fixates and imagines and creates in their mind the worst possible outcome and treats it as inevitable. That's what happened during the pandemic. We are all going to die. Our children are going to die. We're going to lose our job. We're going to be in a soup line, and we're going to perish. The whole world is going to be affected, just like in the 19-teens when the Spanish flu killed 20 million people. That's what's going to happen. Awfulizing and catastrophizing. It's called cognitive distortion. And it's how a person views. It's the glass half empty. It's looking back at the year past, saying it was a terrible year, it was an awful year, bad things happened to me during the year. An example of this was when King David sent comforters to King Hanan when King Hanan's father died. Nahash was King Hanan's father, and apparently we don't know the situation, but at some point, probably when King David was running and fleeing from King Saul, when King David wasn't king yet, Hanan gave him refuge, or Nahash rather gave him refuge, and they became friends. And then Nahash dies. David feels bad. This man was his friend, and so he feels compassion for his son, who's going to be grieving. And so David sends some ambassadors with a gift to comfort Hanan, Nahash's son, who's now the king. And then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun, the son of Nahash, as his father showed kindness to me. So there's nothing bad here, no ill will. No, this is only a good intention. He wants to bless and comfort a son who's grieving over his father. So David sent by the hand of his servants to comfort him concerning his father. And then the princes of the people of Ammon said to Hanun their lord, do you really think that David honors your father because he has sent comforters to you? Has David not rather sent his servants to you to search the city, to spy it out and to overthrow it? That's called awfulizing. You're putting a bad spin on a circumstance, on a situation. And what happened out of that, if you read the rest of the story, they went to war over this, and Hanun lost 40,000 men, 700 charioteers, and the commander of his army in a war over nothing. They put a bad spin on a situation that could have been and should have been a blessing. They could see no good, no benefit, no advantage. Their view of life was distorted. This is what cognitive distortion is. It's actually a kind of a mental disorder. It's not called mental illness, but it certainly is a mental disorder that is connected with things like depression. People who always see the glass half empty. They look back at this past year and they emphasize the bad, the mistakes, the blunders, the things that were done to us that were unkind and unfair and injustice that we experience in our lives. And too much of that kind of the glass half empty mentality can really mess you up. But of course, there were good things this last year. We can all point to good things that God did. If you have a relationship with Christ and you have an active prayer life and you have faith that's growing, it means that you have a testimony of things that God did this past year. Psalms 107:2 says, let the redeemed, we are that, of the Lord say so. We have a testimony. We think, however, that if all things were always what we would define as good things, we would be better off. If none of the bad happened this year, we would be better off if it was only what we call good. What we define as bad that happens works against us, Pastor, doesn't it? What we define as bad works against us, and what we define as good works for us. I have more money, I have a new car, I have a house, I got engaged and got married, I got pregnant, we're having a baby. All the good is beneficial, all the bad we wished it never happened. More bad than good, or more emphasizing on the bad than the good, means we had a bad year. More good than bad, more emphasizing on the good, means you'd probably say we had a good year. But the text doesn't say good things work together for good. It says all things work together for good. It doesn't say good things work together for good and bad things work together for bad, so eliminate the bad and only fixate on the good. The entire bundle of your life experiences this past year is working for your betterment and for your good. So let's look at the option that we all have. Because that's exactly what the text offers us. It doesn't mean you're going to take advantage of it. You could be a glass half empty kind of individual and look at this year as bad and frustrating and setbacks, and I hope I have a better year this year, but I'm not so sure. You could do that. And it has to do with how you view life. The Bible presents us with a very distinct way or philosophy of how you should be viewing your life, because life is going to be made up of good and bad. It is going to be made up of things that we enjoy, that were pleasant, that were beneficial, that were an advantage, that were of benefit to us. And we can clearly see that. But it's also going to be made up of frustrations and setbacks and failures and sin sometimes. Some of you could look back at this last year, and it was a year where you sinned. You did wrong. You disobeyed God. Even that can contribute to something good in your life if you'll have the correct view. The Apostle Paul is drawing a conclusion here, a definitive, distinct conclusion. It's not might, or maybe, or hopefully, or the odds are. All things work together for good, period. And he wrote this. Why? Why did he write all things work together for good? Because I imagine that he's pondering his life and all that he's been through in his life, meditating on all the various situations and trials and shipwrecks, the persecutions, the imprisonments, the beatings, the rejections, the betrayals and the offenses that he endured during his life. And on the other side of that coin, he's preaching the gospel, building churches, seeing people saved. God's miracle provision is occurring, changed lives that he's seeing. And his bundle, all of it, all the bad, all the frustrating, and then all the good testimonies, all of that in one sack, in one big bundle, has worked out for good in his life. And it's a metaphor, I think. Paul's testimony is a metaphor that good can come out of every situation. Pastor Ernie Lopez was falsely and wrongly incarcerated for nearly 3 years. 6 months before he got out of prison, God spoke to me to propose to him that when he gets out of prison, would you be willing to come on staff and be our follow-up pastor? And so he agreed to that 6 months before. And so out of that came this incredible ministry. Every church needs a Pastor Ernie Lopez located to help build that congregation. I tell people all over the world this. I get constant requests. He doesn't know this, but I get all kinds of requests for him to preach, and I kind of have to pick and choose where we're going to send him because I need him here. We need him here. But that came out. I don't know that he would be where he's sitting if it hadn't been for all the trauma that we went through. Sandra, Jonathan went through with the trial, with all the heartache of a guilty verdict and going to prison. He wouldn't be sitting here on staff as our follow-up pastor, traveling around the world preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. All things work together for good. And I know Ernie would say a great big amen to that. Joseph was hated by his brothers, Joseph in the book of Genesis. He was sold into slavery by them. He woke up one morning as a 17-year-old teenager, optimistic about his life, blessed of God, loved by his father. He went to bed that night in a foreign country as a slave, sold by his brothers who hated him. And then he was falsely accused of trying to seduce his master's wife, which was a false accusation, and he was put in prison. And he's forgotten about. And he has to wake up in a prison cell that he doesn't belong in. He's not guilty. Years pass. You know the story. He finally gets out, interprets the dream of Pharaoh. Pharaoh promotes him to prime minister, and during a famine, his brothers come to him to Egypt for food. That's where the food was. They came. They had to go to Joseph. Joseph recognized them, but he didn't. The brothers didn't recognize him. He gives them food. They go their way. And then they have to come back for more food. And then Joseph reveals himself, and they go into a state of panic because they think Joseph is going to take revenge on them. But he said these words, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." The bundle that I talked about, that is filled with so much frustration and injustice and disappointment worked for good. You meant evil against me, he told his brothers, but God meant it for good in order to bring it about, as it is this day, to save many people alive. It's a type, we're really talking about glass half full, glass half empty. We're really talking about having an optimistic disposition, being able to read things that seem to be bad, but putting a God component on top of them. That God works in every circumstance. Paul said, all things work together for good. But optimism is a little bit more than just you saying, oh, that glass is half empty or that glass is half full. And it's more than just a personality trait. The Bible says that God created us in his image. And I believe that optimism is a natural disposition of God's creation. Even though sin has invested itself to a large degree and people are genuinely negative, they've done studies and sociological studies. You would think the opposite. You would think, no, people are negative and people are more optimistic than you give them credit for. Optimism has emotional, physiological, spiritual consequences. Research shows that you are less likely to be rehospitalized after surgery if you're an optimist. Negativity and pessimism makes you physically sicker. Isn't that amazing? People that are optimistic achieve higher academically, and their socioeconomic status is generally higher. In other words, pessimism and negativity will keep you down. Positivity and optimism will facilitate your ability to rise. It has real consequences because that's how God created us. Now, while pessimism and negativity seem to be more prevalent, research actually shows that we are actually, as people in general, more hardwired toward optimism. It's called the optimism bias in the mental health world. And it's found, the optimism bias is found in 80% of the population. Optimism is something we're all capable of. It just needs to be activated. Research shows that people tend to overestimate the probability of good things happening than we do anticipating bad things happening. For example, and this is fascinating to me, divorce rates are as high as 45% in some quarters of our country. But newlyweds do not see it for themselves. They say their chance of divorce is 0. You see, that's the optimism bias. We don't envision bad things happening in a lot of situations and circumstances. When we imagine our future, most people view a future better than the situation they're in now. They don't see a continued downward spiral into oblivion somewhere. This is going to be a better year. I'm going to make some resolutions. I'm going to change. We're naturally wired that way. We just don't always know how to bring it about. So what specifically I'm talking about tonight, and I want to challenge you with, is looking backwards over the events of life. There is a present or a current optimism. That's how we view things right now. Looking at the landscape, people around us, situations, opportunities. There's a present or a current optimism, how we view things right now. There's a looking forward optimism, where we're headed. The vision and the dreams and the aspirations that we have for our life. But what we're talking about here is a looking backward optimism. I wouldn't have chosen some of the situations I've been through in this past year, but look what God did. That's imposing an optimism bias on the past year, even in the face of challenges and difficulties and hardships and assaults and all the negatives that we might identify this past year. I stumbled on a book, and I bought it today, called The Blessings of Disaster. And the subtitle is The Lessons That Catastrophes Teach Us and How Our Future Depends on It. So people study the collapse of a building so it doesn't happen again. They study earthquakes and floods and accidents of every kind, and they investigate and they say, what can we do better? How can we improve? How can we construct in a way that this isn't going to happen? And he imposes that subtitle that I love, The Lessons That Catastrophes Teach Us and How Our Future Depends on It. That is exactly what the text is talking about. All things can contribute for good in life. So let's take a moment to evaluate 2023. The reality is, and I hope you can all say this by the time I'm finished, it was a glass half full year, yeah? You may have suffered a loss, experienced a tragedy. You may earn less money now than you did then. Last year, you earned more than you did this year. You may have had a better job last year than the one you have now. Some relationships may be in conflict and disarray. Not everything is buttoned up in your life right now. But according to this scripture, every one of your past year was a good year. It was a glass half full year. Why? Because all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to his purpose. Actually, this glass is full in one sense. It's half full of water and half full of air and atoms and molecules. There's the part that we see and there's the part that we can't see. And that's a good metaphor for life. We see what happened. We experienced it. The sadness, the hardship, the difficulty, the challenge, the frustration, and all the injustice that we experience and the disappointments, that's the water in the glass. But what's above the glass that we don't see always is a God in heaven who's at work advancing his will in your life. It's neither all bad or all good. Struggles are contrasted with newfound strength. The harder the wind blows, the stronger the tree becomes. Hardship, setback, failure are contrasted with the unseen hand of God that comes in just in the nick of time to help us and lift us up and encourage us and strengthen us. If you had never fallen, you wouldn't know that there's a God who can pick you up. If you haven't slid into a season of despair, you would never have the unseen hand of God with its compassion and ability to comfort, to pick you up, change your disposition, and encourage you. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 4:16, therefore we do not lose heart. We could, but we don't. And I think it's a scripture like this that inspired what he wrote in Romans, all things work together for good. Therefore we do not lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed. This is a glass half full kind of guy. Even though the outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction is but for a moment, and is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but of the things which are not seen. Don't always look to the bottom part of the glass. Look to the upper part where the unseen hand of God is at work. We don't look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. All things work together for good. It's a picture, all things, that various components is what it's referring to. Some different items that you put in the bundle that I'm referring to. And it's a picture of all the events of your life this past year working as a team. There's an offensive lineman, an offensive tackle. There's a wide receiver, there's a running back, there's a quarterback. There's a defensive end, there's a linebacker, there are safeties. Every different kind of body size and personality, that represents the bundle that is your life, and it works together as a team, as members of a team, all things working together to get you across the finish line. Verse 28 in the Amplified Translation says, and we know with great confidence that God, who is deeply concerned about us, causes all things to work together as a plan for good. It's pieces of an enormous puzzle that takes a lifetime to put together. And when it's all put together, it makes complete sense. When you see an individual piece of a puzzle, where does that go? That doesn't belong here, does it? Yeah, put it right there. There's nothing around it yet, so you can't see what it's connected to, but it's waiting there for connectivity that's going to occur in the future when more and more pieces are put in place. All things working together to make a better version of yourself, more Christ-like. Progress is seen, and the perfect will of God is advancing. Now, I have to say that there's a big however, because this is not automatic. There are conditions. It says all things work together for good to those who love God. Now, you'd all say, I love God, of course. But love in that sense is not just an emotion or something you say or a feeling. It's the action that you take to demonstrate your love. If you never talked to your wife, you got up in the morning and went to work, you never kissed her goodbye, never said I love you, never bought her a birthday present, an anniversary present, only talked to her when you were forced to if she asked you a question, ignored her most of the time. A man like that could say, yeah, of course I love my wife. I married her. I'm living with her, for crying out loud. I'm contributing to the household. She would say, he doesn't love me. To those who love God. Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. This is the first commandment. Those are all action words. It's not just sentiment, but it's what you do. It's what you say. It's how you act. It's how you conduct yourself. And the above, what I just said, is only true in that context. All things work together for good to those who love God more than you love money. How's that one? More than you love your working life, more than you love your friends, your hobbies, your recreation. The Las Vegas Raiders and other sports teams, I love Jesus more. And I'm going to demonstrate that by being faithful, by building the church, by contributing everything I have and everything I can to advancing the work of God in my life. Don't run around saying you love God if you're ignoring him. If you're not prioritizing what he prioritizes, which is the church. And in this dimension, it causes the pieces of your life to fit. All things work together for good to those who love God to the extreme, is really what that means. All your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. Romans says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So there must be an imperfect will of God. There must be a diminished version of God's will. In other words, there's some elements of God's will, but it's not the perfect will of God. You identify with Jesus, identify with the church, and there's some areas of obedience in your life, but there are clearly areas of disobedience and compromise. So all things working together for good depends on loving God and contending for his perfect will in your life. Yes, in everything God works for good for all those who believe. Bad things can turn out good for those who, with faith, face them and cope with them. Moments come when miracles happen and breakthroughs occur. When strength and resolve are renewed and the shadows lift, when life takes precedence over our despair and grief, and we can pick up the pieces and begin again with hope. Moments come when disappointments become larger. When in the confines of illness and suffering, out of despair comes peace and healing. When out of destruction and loss rise new horizons and promise. When in the depths of despair we meet Jesus, who leads us closer to God and gives us the joy for which we yearn. One October day in 1946, while Catherine DeVenck was pregnant with her second child, she was overcome by gas leaking from the stove in her kitchen. She passed out. She revived. Her husband, Jose, saved her just in time. 6 months later, on April 20th, 1947, Oliver was born, a beautiful and healthy-looking baby boy. And yet there was something wrong. In a short time, the parents had their worst premonitions confirmed at New York City's Mount Sinai Hospital. Oliver was blind and severely brain damaged. The gas the mother had inhaled had reached Oliver, causing a severe, catastrophic, incurable condition. The doctors recommended immediately that he be put into an institution. He's our son, the mother said. No. We're going to take him home. For his entire life, Oliver was a helpless infant. He never spoke, never gave evidence of any kind of a reaction or recognizing anyone. He was almost always completely immobile on the flat of his back, but he never developed any bed sores because so tender was the care he received from his mother and father. When he died at the age of 33, his mother said, Oliver was always a hopeless case. We knew that. Yet he was such a precious gift for all of us. He had no apparent potential, and I suppose the world would judge him as an unproductive burden. But he was a holy, innocent child of light to us. And through Oliver, I learned the deepest meaning of compassion. That's a glass half full. Looking back over a catastrophically disastrous circumstances, all things work together for good. I want you to bow your heads with me.
Here I am, down on my knees again, surrendering all, surrendering all. Find me here, Lord, as you draw me near, desperate for you, desperate for you. I surrender.